Welcome to the Football Debates Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Debates. In this episode, we're going to talk about how college football is broken, some of the ways we know it's broken, what I see as three of the major issues in college football, and some of my ideas as how we can fix them. Before we get started, I just want to say that this was actually going to be a series of podcasts that I was going to do in August leading into the college football season to give you, the college football fan, something to think about while you're watching the games. But over the last few weeks, between members of Congress, other college sports, and some football coaches at the college level, they've done some things, said some things, made some comments regarding college sports that I think need to be addressed right away. So I moved the timeline of this video up, but when we get to the solutions, these are things that I've been thinking about for a while now. But how do we know college football is broken? Well, there's three things that have come across in recent weeks that have proved to me that college football does have a problem. And one of those is the fact that Congress has gotten involved. Now, I'm not a fan of politicians or politics. I really don't care for that subject. And it's not something that I care to discuss. If I wanted to, that's what this podcast would be about. I'd be discussing politics. But you know that you have an issue if you have politicians that don't like each other, don't like being in the same room with each other, and are crafting legislation to fix your problem. Well, then your organization definitely has a significant problem. Over the last few weeks, a number of bills have been introduced in Congress. Some have not even gotten out of committee, but some have and have made their way through the various departments of both the House and the Senate. They have a bunch of different names. One was the Fix College Sports Act, and another one was a Protect College Sports Act, and there's another one that's a Save College Sports Act. Sponsored by different members of Congress, they're all very similar, and right now Congress is looking at all these different versions, trying to get one that works. But the fact that Congress is getting involved proves that college football does have a problem. And the NCAA has ignored this problem for a while. Ever since they lost the case for the NIL, the name, image, and likeness, where the money now can go to the college athletes, which I personally don't have a problem with. I always thought that the NCAA did kind of exploit these college athletes. Well, the NCAA, since losing that case, has just kind of ignored the problem, hoped it would go away, and dealt with other issues, mostly expanding the college basketball tournaments and focusing on all the good things that are going on, like the track and field championships and college baseball and women's softball World Series going on. And the NCAA was just not really dealing with this issue. So Congress decided to step up and make it an issue. And one of the reasons that the Congress has had to step up is because schools are losing other programs. ESPN did a story about this, that the University of Arkansas was dropping their tennis program. That was just this spring of 2026 that was announced. The expenses for the University of Arkansas tennis program this past season was roughly about $2.3 million. University of Arkansas said that they were reallocating money for the sports programs to help them get better football players into the university. Well, I'm all a fan of college football and of players getting paid. Should 4 or 5 players, if it's even that many, get money that gets rid of an entire sports program? Now you're looking at athletes who might change schools, might transfer to continue their tennis careers. You have coaches who are now out of a job. But let's credit the fans at the University of Arkansas. Fans and boosters stepped up, and they provided enough funding based on this past year's expenditures to fund the Arkansas tennis program for another couple of years. And I think hopefully that's what Congress has in number one of these bills, where schools cannot take funding from one sport, say a golf or a tennis or a swimming or diving or the quote unquote lesser sports, and move it over to football just to try and make their football team more competitive. And another issue that brings up the Arkansas spending was the fall of 2025. Texas Tech's defensive line made $7 million through the various NIL deals and other sponsorships and from boosters and wherever else they got their money. But that was just the defensive line for Texas Tech. One position group at one college in college football. They got enough money this past year based on Arkansas's tennis expenditures to fund the Arkansas tennis program for 3 years. So while, yes, college football and men's basketball are the two major money makers in college athletics, we can't ignore those other programs or those other student athletes. And the spending for college football has gone quite a bit crazy, which brings us back to Congress having to pass legislation, which brings us back to the NCAA not doing anything after these NIL deals are announced, not providing any framework, not providing any rules or guidance for the schools on how these issues should be handled. And the last thing that I want to point out about how we know college football is broken is when the college football coaches themselves are questioning what's going on. Just a couple weeks ago, Kirby Smart, the head football coach at Georgia, got a couple of national titles recently. He is getting so frustrated with the player transfers and the NIL and how the NCAA is basically sitting on their hands and not doing anything. He actually suggested that the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, which has been the dominant conference in college football for the better part of the last 25 years, should leave the NCAA and basically do their own thing. Well, that proves that the NCAA is not doing anything. They're just sitting around hoping everything gets better. But that's not how it works, and that's why Congress is getting involved. And that's why fans are starting to speak out. And that's why people like me are making videos like this. So we have all of these issues with college sports, which brings about a quote from former Notre Dame coach Frank Leahy that I like. The quote is, "Egotism is the anesthetic that dulls the pain of stupidity." And I think there's enough egotism in college football that it's dulling the pain of stupidity of just about everybody involved. The NCAA is just sitting on their hands. They're not trying to fix the problem. They're not, from what I can see, what I've heard and what I've read, even really trying to address the problem. Basically, their stance was, well, everything was fine before the NIL, so that's what we should go back to. But if we're not going to go back to it, well, that's your guys' problem. Coaches and athletic directors are frustrated because they're signing NIL deals with these players, and now the players, after 1 year and not getting on the playing field or realizing that they're not a fit for the system or the scheme, they're leaving. So these players are getting money and then leaving to go to another school to get more money and maybe get a better opportunity. Well, that's frustrating coaches and athletic directors, because what is the point of recruiting these players out of high school to have them come to your school for 1 year, take some money, and then go somewhere else? So this is becoming a big problem, a big issue in college sports, which leads us to what I see as the three main problem areas. The first one is money / the NIL deals. As I said before, I don't have a problem with college athletes being paid, especially since the NCAA and the member schools are making hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, from these teams. In fact, this past season, both the Big Ten and the SEC split money among their member schools. They have basically revenue sharing agreements. 18 teams in the Big Ten, 16 teams in the SEC. Each conference split $1 billion with their member schools. Well, yes, that money can go and fund general education scholarships, other athletic teams. I get that $1 billion can be spread around throughout the university. But how much of that is really getting spread out to the university? How much of that money is staying with the football programs and the men's basketball programs? While they do fund a good chunk of the university's athletic departments, how can they justify that much money? And realistically, and I mentioned this in a previous podcast where I talked about college football realignment, realistically right now, Wyoming and Fresno State and Hawaii should be able to technically compete for a football national championship with Notre Dame and Texas and Oregon, theoretically. But do Wyoming and Fresno State and Hawaii have boosters and have backers that can provide $7 million for one position group like Texas Tech did? So the money is getting really out of hand. It's getting more than a bit crazy at college football level. Something needs to be done and needs to be reined in to control the spending. And we'll talk about that more towards the end of the video when I talk about some of the solutions for these problems. The next problem that I see are player eligibility and player transfers. We'll get to the transfers in a minute, but right now, player eligibility, an issue came up this past year in men's basketball. There was a player who, after high school, he didn't go to college, and he jumped to the NBA G League, which is a developmental league for the NBA. So after being there for a couple of years, in a sense being a professional athlete, he decided to go back to school and enrolled at Alabama. Per the NCAA's own bylaws and regulations, he was a professional athlete. NCAA athletes need to be amateurs, so he could not compete. But they found ways around that. And it became a legal drama that overshadowed a very good basketball season that the Alabama men's basketball team was having. Player eligibility, I think, needs to be straightened out. There needs to be limits on it, just like with the transfers. I don't have a problem with players transferring. Players need to transfer if a coach gets fired or leaves, or if the school that they're at, the system, they thought it was a good idea to go there, but they find out that the school's not a good fit for them. The offensive or defensive system the player is playing in isn't a good fit for them. They should be allowed to transfer. But right now, there are no limits on transfers. Players can go from school to school to school in the transfer portal every year. This past year in the NFL draft, listening to some of the talking heads as the draft was going on, they were talking about, well, this player, he spent a year at Washington, and then he spent a year at Texas, and then he spent a year at Oklahoma, and then he spent a year at this school and that school. There were college football players that played for 4 different teams over the course of 4 seasons. How is that beneficial to the athlete? How is that beneficial to the school? How is that beneficial to the team? So there needs to be some limits on those players transferring and the craziness that follows that. And a good example of that is just a couple of years ago, the University of Marshall made a football bowl game. They had a good season, and they qualified for a bowl. Well, after the season, the coach left to take another job. The majority of the team ended up leaving. Most of them transferred to other schools. A few, their eligibility was used up, so they declared for the NFL draft. Once the coach left, several incoming freshmen changed their status from being a commitment to decommitting to the University of Marshall. And Marshall actually had to pull out of their bowl game because they could barely field a team, not even a competitive team. They could barely field a team for that bowl game. So those transfers affected them that way. And with coaches leaving after the regular season but before the bowl game, and players leaving, what you get in some of these bowl games are players that have barely played during the course of the year that even the diehard fans of the school don't know who some of these players are. So the transferring of players needs to be limited, and it really needs to be controlled by the NCAA. But once again, Congress is getting involved because the NCAA isn't doing anything. And speaking of coaching changes, coaches now are leaving their teams right after the regular season is over to go on to another job, a better job, a bigger school. You're seeing the lower level schools like a North Texas and a Hawaii and a Washington State are losing their coaches to the bigger schools like Penn State and Notre Dame and Oklahoma and UCLA or wherever. The big issue came this past year. Lane Kiffin, the head coach at Ole Miss, After the college football regular season was over, he bolted for not just another school, but another school in conference just across the state line to LSU. He tried to take a good chunk of the staff and several of the players with him. Well, Mississippi's season wasn't done yet. They made the college football playoffs. And prior to him leaving, there was talk that they had a chance at actually winning the national championship. They were playing really well. And they ended up losing, I believe, in the semifinals to the University of Miami. And they were very competitive, and they lost that game at the end, if I remember correctly. But what could have happened if none of that drama played out? If Kiffin had stayed at Ole Miss, maybe they would have won and made it to the national championship game. Then who knows what would have happened. But college football coaches need to be limited when they can change schools. I don't have a problem with them moving up, going from a lower tier school up to a bigger school. I don't have a problem with that. That's the natural evolution of, progressing as a coach. But when that can happen, needs to be addressed. So here are the solutions I'm proposing, starting with the NIL money and the money in college football. Let's have a salary cap. I'm just going to throw out there a random number of $20 million. In a previous episode, I talked about college football realignment. To get rid of the college football playoff system, I suggested that since college football is the NFL minor leagues, why not have the college football playoff system be similar to the NFL playoff system? And you can see that in that other video. But let's have a salary cap too. And yes, there are going to be ways around that salary cap. That'll be issues that'll have to be worked out by the NCAA with all the boosters involved. They need to set up some rules and regulations for that. But if there's a salary cap, every player would get money from that salary cap. Just like the NFL. Every player on the roster gets paid. There's actually a league minimum. There's also a veteran minimum. If a player has been in the league so many years, there's a minimum amount of money that teams are required to pay them. Let's do that for college football. Let's have a salary cap and maybe limit the rosters to 90 players, let's say. If you have a $20 million salary cap, it comes out to about $220,000 in change, roughly, for each player. Well, just like in the NFL, high-profile players, high-profile positions are going to make more money than the players at the end of the roster, which is fine. But everybody needs to get paid. And the players at the end of the roster, the incoming redshirt freshmen, they're going to get their money. But let's try to reward these players a little bit. Just like the NFL has a minimum for rookies and a minimum for veterans. Let's reward these players. If these players don't transfer, let's give them an additional bonus to their pay, to their salary, if you want to call it that, every year. So if they're with the program for 5 full seasons, with all their eligibility, they get bonuses each year. Maybe that will give some of these players an incentive to stay at the school they're at. Speaking of players transferring and changing schools or not changing schools, player eligibility and transfers need to be adjusted. Now, player eligibility was in a bit of a murky status the last few years because of the COVID pandemic. The NCAA, doing one of the few things that I actually agreed with them doing, gave all college athletes an additional year of eligibility if they were affected by the COVID pandemic. Well, that time has now passed. So now, all college football players should get 5 years. 1 additional year if they have a medical issue, which the NCAA has done for years. They allow 1 medical red shirt. And for those of you not familiar, red shirt year is a year where a player can practice, but they cannot play. Or if they play in a limited number of games, let's say they play the first game and part of the second game, they get injured, well, then that can be a red shirt year. But a total of a maximum of 6 years. Red shirt year, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, so there's 5, and they're allowed 1 medical red shirt, and only 1. There have been players in the last few years who have had multiple medical red shirts. And while, yes, I see that, these are, in a sense, exceptions to the rules, still maybe their body is trying to tell them something, that maybe a high-level college sport or professional sport isn't what their body needs or wants. So maybe these athletes should think about a different career path while still staying in sport, maybe becoming a coach or official, an announcer, something along those lines, maybe a sports agent. Well, let's have these players have 5 years of eligibility plus the one potential medical redshirt, and then that's it. Then they're done. Same way with transfers. Players should be allowed a limited number of transfers. Like I mentioned before, in this past year's NFL draft, there were players that were at 3 schools in 3 years. So let's change that. Or when these high school athletes sign their college letter of intent on National Signing Day, which we'll address that more here in a bit too. These incoming freshmen, I think, should be locked in for 2 years. A redshirt freshman year if they want, and then their freshman year. So there's 2 years. Then they can transfer. They get one transfer of their choice. So let's say a player grew up on the East Coast and they were offered a scholarship and go play at the University of Washington. Or let's say they're there just for a year. They're homesick. They don't feel comfortable out there, so they transfer. So there's their one transfer. They transfer to the University of Wisconsin because there's an assistant coach there that they were familiar with, or they like the style of play of Wisconsin for whatever reason. But now they go to the University of Wisconsin. So there's their one transfer that they get. They're at Wisconsin for a year or two, and the coach gets fired. Or the coach takes a position at a different college. For whatever reason, the coach leaves and the coaching staff leaves. Now that player can have one more transfer. One of their own and one because of circumstances outside of their control, like a coach leaving. So now let's say that this athlete is leaving Wisconsin and they go to Wyoming. Bit of a smaller school where they might have a chance to play more, maybe display their athletic skills more. And now they're done. You get 2 transfers, one on your own and one because of the coaching staff. Now that athlete has to finish their career at the University of Wyoming. A lot of people might not like this idea, but it beats the ridiculousness of a college athlete jumping from school to school every year, just trying to get playing time, maybe trying to get more money out of NIL deals, or trying to win a national championship or whatever. There's something to be said about commitment, and these are high school kids becoming young men, and I think part of the college athletics job, coaches, the athletic directors, is to help teach these players responsibility. Maybe that's an old school way of thinking, but if these college athletes are to be treated like adults, like many of them claim they want to be treated, well, you make your decision, you have to live with the consequences of that decision. So you get one transfer on your own, one because of a coaching change, and then that's it. You're done transferring. That's the end of it. Speaking of coaches getting fired or moving on, coaching changes can happen very quickly. Just a couple of years ago, a coach by the name of Jimmy Rogers won a national championship at South Dakota State, undefeated season. He was there one more year, got the national semifinal game, and then he left for Washington State University. He was there 1 year, and now he's at Iowa State University. So in just 3 seasons, he went from FCS level to a lower level FBS school, now to the Big 12. So he's moving up, and he's going through those changes. But as we saw with Lane Kiffin this past fall, when can those coaches make those changes? Jimmy Rogers is, in a sense, an example of the proper progression for a coach, going from a lower level to a higher level to a higher level. And coaches can go from a higher level down to a lower level. Maybe they realize they're not cut out for the FBS school, or maybe they're an assistant coach at the FBS level and they take a head coaching job at the Division II level, let's say. So that way they start their head coaching journey. But when can we make all these coaching changes? I personally don't think that just because the regular season ends, the coaching staff's job is over. We're seeing coaches now for the last several years, and it's going on more than a decade now, the regular season ends and then they're not there for the bowl game. I think that college coaches should be kept at their schools. Their contracts should be through the end of the college football season, which technically should be the national championship game, whether their school is playing in it or not. Then we can have the coaching movement. In the previous episode that I mentioned before, college football realignment, I suggested having college football playoff basically happening in the month of December, and then having the national championship game right around New Year's Day like it used to be. And then classes started again in January. That would give the players time to transfer and move around. Now the national championship game isn't played till almost the end of January, in a sense, after the next school year has started. And yes, I'm aware that these college athletes aren't students like they used to be 25, 30 years ago. I'm aware of that. But let's keep this timeline more in check, especially when you consider that National Signing Day for high school students is in early February. Let's give these coaches time to finish coaching out their team through the end of December, early January. Then they can interview, move their families, get to the new program, get the new staff hired, look at the players that they have, see what players are leaving through potential transfers, see what players are staying, and then allow them some time to go on the recruiting trail. Who says that the National Signing Day for high school players has to be in early February? Let's move it back to the middle of February, or maybe even the end of February. Let's move it back to that time period. That gives the coaches more time to recruit players, to see what their new team needs, since they're coming into a new situation. And some of these coaches, they're making major moves from California to the East Coast, or the East Coast out to the West Coast, wherever they may be going. Let's give them time to make that adjustment, give them time to help their families make that adjustment, because we have to remember, these coaches are people also. We'll talk about that more in an upcoming episode too. But these coaches have a bunch of different priorities other than just the football team. They are responsible to the boosters and to the college administration, but they're also responsible to the players they're leaving, players they're coming into, and the coaches that they've worked with. Some coaches will stay at a school when the head coach leaves because that's where their family likes it and they've formed bonds there. Some coaches will follow that new head coach to wherever, and they'll go from school to school because that coaching staff has a cohesiveness that's hard to just pick up and develop right away in 1 year. Sometimes it takes several years for a coaching staff to bond, know what each other's thinking, and to be on the same page. So these are some of the problems and some of the solutions that I see for college football. These aren't going to solve all the problems of college football. And yes, some of these solutions maybe or probably are a bit naive. But college football is a game I enjoy watching. I like the differences of college football from the NFL. And I think it is a good difference that, in a sense, makes college football a little bit of a different game than the NFL, that makes it at times more enjoyable than NFL games. So let's try and fix the game that we as fans enjoy, that occupies our Saturday afternoons, develops rivalries among schools, among states, among family members, but they're friendly rivalries usually. So let's keep those rivalries, keep that energy for college football, and hopefully, if we can fix these problems with college sports, specifically the money, maybe that can enhance the universities altogether, and maybe enhance some of the other sports by allowing more money to go to some of the lower tier sports, for example, like the tennis and the golf and the swimming, the ones that don't attract the big crowds. But let's give those athletes some credit because they're doing a good job too. So let's try to fix these problems to help everyone across the board. This has been the Football Debates Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Debates. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you on our next episode.